I was inspired to found Build My SOP because I was a manager running these facilities for many years, and the Achilles heel I've seen in every business that I've entered has always been their standard operating procedures and their employee training. Build My SOP offers document management, learning management, and task management for our business owners and our managers. We're a really easy platform to be able to navigate and to be able to track and keep revisions of all of the changes that you've made within the years of your facility being open. And the plants don't stop growing and retail stores don't stop selling. And so it's very challenging to keep up with this when you're also having to get product out of the door at the end of the day. People should sign up with Build My SOP right now because regulations are in place right now. Regulations are going to be in place in the future, and things are going to be evolving and changing as long as this industry is here. We're really a vendor that people can trust. We're helping people with their bottom line, creating homogenized products, creating employee accountability, and just helping them with that peace of mind at the end of the day. Hi, good evening. Welcome to Ask the Regulator. We are at Season 1, Episode 5. Tonight is all about preparing for an audit because it's going to happen. I am your host, Kady Cravens, founder and CEO at BuildMySOP.com. And with me is our VP of Regulatory Affairs, former regulator, Tom Mohan. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing good, Kady. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm excited about our discussion tonight.
This one should be a good one.
Going to be a good one. So I'm going to kind of let you take the lead on this one.
Sure.
I'd love for you to let our viewers know a little bit about your background in the space and also your experience in audits.
So let me jump in a little bit. So I've got a little bit over 30 years in public safety, starting with EMS, working as an EMT paramedic. And I started into a law enforcement career in 1998, where I worked several different units. And my last law enforcement agency I worked for was the Marijuana Enforcement Division with the state of Colorado for the past 7 years, where my last position was the supervisor of a field office. And during that time, I was a criminal investigator 1, a 2, a subject matter expert, and of course, a supervisor. And during that time, I've done thousands of investigations and audits of different businesses from cultivations, stores, medical, retail, even laboratories, working with different agencies like CDPHE, which is the health department for Colorado, who licenses labs also. So with that, I have a very well-rounded background as far as audits go.
It sounds like it. You would be the guy to know.
Well, I don't know everything, but I've done pretty much a bunch of it.
You know a lot. I know that the audits are a very, highly anticipated event that everyone in the facility is constantly kind of keeping their eyes out for because there's different types of audits. They can be scheduled or they can be random, right? So this is something that I think a lot of our viewers are excited to hear about tonight and just kind of, pull back the curtain and get to kind of hear it from the inspector's viewpoint.
Ask some of the questions, absolutely. And I'll give you some of the insight things that we look at and look for. But you're absolutely right. There's pretty much 2 main audits that you're looking at. You're going to have the announced audit, where they call up and we schedule something. Hey, Tuesday at this time, we're going to be there. And then the other one is the unannounced inspection. And that can take forms in many different ways. We don't just do inspections by on-site. Inspections also are inspections of your seed to sale tracking system, which we can do remotely. Other things that we look at too are your feedbacks on your social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, other things like that. And a lot of things that are said on those Instagram things can trigger further investigation. So if somebody's saying they're purchasing moldy weed from your retail store, these are things that we look at and that we have looked at in the past because that's a public safety issue and that catches our attention very quickly. So just your social media campaign alone will trigger audits. Some things that a lot of people don't realize.
I knew about you guys being able to remotely, have an overview of the state seed to sale system back end, but I did not know that about the social media stuff. That's really interesting.
Well, not just the social media, but also the word of mouth. And of course, customers complain. There's written format, there's phone format that they can call in and complain. So those also trigger those unannounced investigations or audits that you see in the background that you are not even aware of.
Now, what about on social media posts that a company might make? Like sometimes I've seen maybe they're consuming on one of their posts on camera, maybe the car's being driven. Um,
So
does
several
anything like that
things
trigger anything?
so several things that we've seen in the past is people putting posts, especially in the early years of 420 celebrations of, hey, come and partake in this free product where you can't give away a product in Colorado, and they're advertising that they're breaking the rules on their social media campaign, or hey, come and get this, or you see one of their employees wearing company logo where they're doing something that's against the rules, i.e., consuming on site, where you can see them on a licensed premise. A lot of that stuff you'll see on social media campaigns, or even consuming at a cultivation. Who's going to see it? Of course, but their social media campaigns will actually have some of those pictures, which will trigger audits.
Wow. So something to think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so you mentioned before you work alongside other departments with your inspections. What agencies would, as an owner operator, can I expect to perform an audit at my facility?
All of them. So, for example, you're going to have taxation is going to do an audit on your taxes. It's going to happen. The question is when, and when is it going to happen? Um, Colorado, they pretty much will stick with, once they start with one of your licenses, they'll do all of your licenses in the same pattern. But taxation will do that. Then you've also got your local licensing authority. You've got your local building, your local fire. Some have local law enforcement that do ordinance investigations or audits also. So any of those can do audits. You can also have the state or the county health department come in to make sure that you're following proper restaurant type code. So if you're doing edibles, for example, you've got to have that same type of sanitary requirements that restaurants or food manufacturers have. So you're going to get an audit from them also. So each one of these is kind of their own different one. But if you follow the same category and follow the same principles as preparing for an audit for one, you can do it for all of them.
I love that. I love that. So just to kind of summarize, we can expect audits from the state regulatory departments, the health departments, fire departments, building and zoning, OSHA, depending on your employee count, right?
In the state.
And the state. Whether, I mean, really in any facility, especially in Colorado, the Department of Agriculture, they need to
That's
check
another one.
on
Yes.
your scales. I know in cultivation they'll check on a little bit more than just the scales, but you can even expect them in a retail store or manufacturing because they need to check on that calibration, and you can expect them once a year.
So the Department of Ag also does all of the pesticide investigations.
Mhm.
That's their kind of bread and butter. So they'll also do the Pesticide Applicator Act sections of that. So yeah, Department of Ag is another one that I totally
But
forgot
the
about. Thank
fire
you.
department in Colorado also looks at your pesticides. You're required to submit a list to them of what pesticides are in the building. And when they come in for their inspection, they'll have that list with them. And it's also supposed to be posted at the door. And then they'll verify that those are the only pesticides that you actually have in your
So
machine.
those, even though it's a pesticide list that you're giving the fire department, they're looking at it for a different reason. They're looking at it from the health and safety standpoint, where Department of Ag is looking at it for the application standpoint.
Okay.
So yes, it's the same list, but they're looking at it from a different standpoint because some chemicals react differently with water. So if the fire department is actually battling a blaze at a cultivation, they want to know what chemicals are being involved there. And if you've got something that reacts to water, they want to know that. So they'll have to use a foam or a different type of procedure to fight their fire. So yes, same list that Department of Ag wants, but totally different reason.
Thank you. And I think it's so much better when owner operators can understand the reason behind why they're being asked to give the same information over and over again. I don't think people really understand that these departments don't really necessarily communicate with one another unless they're assigned to like investigate something, right? Then they have to work side along each other and share information. But until that happens, you guys aren't communicating at all with one another.
Correct. And the thing is they won't know. Department of Ag is not going to tell the fire department, oh, hey, by the way, you're going to a fire there and they have sodium metal in the back because they're trying something that's their proprietary way of doing things. And sodium metal turns into flame when it touches water. So, which is a bad thing when you're fighting a fire. Other things like anhydrous ammonia, which are used as a fertilizer or an industrial refrigerant, react differently. It's anhydrous means without water. So the way to actually negate it is with water. So these are the things that the fire department wants to know versus Department of Ag is, what are you using this product for? And is it consistent with the labeling and safety standards in the Pesticide Applicators Act? So you're right, different list. And that's why I say, if you prepare for an audit for all of these, that one binder can work for all of your audits.
Yep, absolutely. So what are inspectors usually looking for when conducting an audit? And I know you and I talked a little bit about this. There's general audits compared to targeted audits. Let's touch base on those.
Yeah, so let's start with the targeted audit. A targeted audit is specifically one item. And that is what we used in the past because there's so many different licenses that we didn't get to. And to see all or see more licenses, we would pick certain items that were a problem within the industry. For example, one of the items that we would pick would be visitors log. A lot of times people sign into that visitors log and they're like, okay, bye. And they leave, turn in their visitors badge. And then you look at the visitors log and they haven't signed out. So you've got 7 people who have been in your cultivation for the past month. Are they? So that was kind of a problem. So one of the things we look at is that one specific thing.
Is there a ding or a fine associated with each field that's left blank on a log like that?
It can be. So the thing with a violation is there's several different things that could happen with that violation. A simple violation can result in a verbal warning, as in, hey, these are a problem, let's fix this. Because part of the thing that we want to do when I was a regulator was we want to educate people and make sure that they understand the rules and are trying to be compliant. Sometimes people are trying to be compliant and they're overwhelmed and they just need a little help or a little extra education in the matter. So a verbal warning sometimes works. But after that, if it's a consistent problem, maybe a written warning, and then from that, it can compress or it can progress into something more where it can turn into fines, days of suspension, ultimately to revocation of your license. Not from one signature missing on a visitor's log, but it could compound from that. But a targeted specifically is one item that they look for. And that's just one item I'm looking at is the visitor's log. It could be occupational badges that every employee's got their badge on and it's in the correct position above their waist and they're not expired. Each target is usually 1 or 2, maybe 3 simple items. I'll tell you a big one that was ours that we like to do was battery backups. So the first thing you do when you went to a business was you pulled the power cord from the battery backup from the wall. Okay, let's talk about something else, do this or that. The next thing, let's go back and make sure that the video system is still operating and running.
Would most people how was that? What's the percentage of people that would pass that one?
So when we first started doing that, the percentages was quite high of failure because most people plug their battery backup in and they're told by their security team that this is going to last the appropriate amount of time that the state requires, which it probably does when they first put it in. But just like a car battery, it doesn't last for 10, 15 years. If you get 5 years out of a car battery, that's pretty good. But the other thing that people don't realize too is businesses grow and they add cameras and DVR space and it requires more power and they want to have a bigger terabyte. So that battery backup that they initially put in even 6 months ago isn't enough power for what they added to it and nobody checks it. And that's why in standard operating procedures, one of those standard operating procedures should be monthly, quarterly, checking your battery backup. Also other things too, to make sure you have the appropriate amount of days on your video storage. Sometimes people put in motion cameras, which do fine. And then all of a sudden a fan gets caught on a video camera and it eats up all of your data space. Instead of having the appropriate amount of days, you have half of them because nobody's checking on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. So these are things that you want to put in your checklist as far as your SOPs of, hey, managers, once a month on the first of the month, the end of the month, whatever you want it to be, the 15th of the month, or do it twice a month. These are the procedures you need to do in order to check all these things to make sure that they're operating.
And then
But
create
that's
an event on your calendar that
correct.
says, ding, ding, check the cameras.
Check the cameras. Well, not only does it do a couple things, so even when we do a targeted inspection, some of them are going to be, hey, I want to look at your 40 days of video surveillance. Well, if you're the manager and you haven't used your video surveillance system in 8 months, well, what happens is you start fumbling around with it. And I'll tell you a little secret that as a regulator in the past, when you're working with that and you can't figure it out, that gives me more time to look around at other things. And if I'm not getting the answers from you on this, I'm looking at other items and I'm finding other violations. Number one. Number two, the more that the manager is fumbling, not being able to get the printout that we're asking for, showing the 40 days, it gets their frustration levels higher, which they now are going to fumble after the fact of getting the video surveillance. Hey, I need to see the last month's power bill because you have to show all of the required documents for your business. And now that you're flustered because you couldn't get the video up because you haven't used it in 8 months, you're not finding the power bill. So now you're adding all these different violations together, which, like we talked about before, one little violation is not a big deal. 27, 30 little violations can add up to a big deal. And this could all be something from somebody not operating their DVR once a month to make sure that it's working correctly, their battery backup's working, and everything works smoothly.
I know when I ran operations, I had a once a month just video surveillance training with all the managers. And each month, one manager would drive, but we'd have to export an image and be able to print it from a color printer,
Yep.
export video, and then be able to give directions to the inspector on how to open that video accordingly. And we'd have to show I think it's 42 days, right, worth of
40.
backup. It's 40, but
Well, depending on which state.
yeah, Colorado 40. So we would do 42. And so we would check all those things on that list, and we do it once a month just for that refresh.
And that's the thing. And, we'll go over here in a little bit and audit a checklist that we kind of came up with. Now, it's not an all-inclusive checklist, but I'm telling you, if you can go through this checklist and have all these boxes checked, it will make your audits go so much smoother.
Good baseline.
Yes.
You can add to it too. You can add things that you learn you need additionally on there.
And just like some of and I'll even take like the ID books. Some of the things that we looked at in targeted inspections were, what were your procedures on how to check IDs at the front door? And we would look at their ID book. If you've got the crisp new ID book with no creases or anything in it, we know you're not using it. But if you open it up and you've got handwritten notes that say, hey, Oklahoma's got red, coming out of China, red hologram is wrong, and you see all these different notes on it, we know that you're using it. We know that you're using these SOPs, that you're following the guidelines. That's what we look for. A lot of things that people don't really look at is, okay, the rules say that you have to have this stuff, but the rules also say you have to use it. And if you're not using it, that starts us looking at, well, what else are you not using? What else are you skirting the rules on? So those are the inside tricks from our standpoint that I looked at and I talked with my people about was, if they have these items and are not using it, what else are they not using?
Right. So some common targeted audits would be focused on maybe the camera, the visitor log, possibly your 90 days worth of transfer manifests. Maybe choosing a plant tag in your seat to sale system and saying, show me where this plant is.
So it's kind of a formulation of what's the kind of the previous trend over the past few months going on, as far as the investigations and the audits that the investigators were doing. and they said, hey, we've been finding problems with the visitor log. So that's how we'd come up with the visitor log as a targeted. Hey, you know, I've been finding that battery backups haven't been really up to par. Okay, well, let's go hit 30 different licenses in the next couple of days and do battery backup only. That's where the target has come from. So the thing is that using a checklist and doing it, like you said, monthly, and having your managers run through your video, your battery backup, your cameras, make sure that you've got cameras throughout the facility, make sure that the visitors logs are signed in. That should be done almost daily. The manager, before they leave for the evening, one of the things they should look at is the visitors log. Is everybody signed out? Are you missing somebody within your facility, especially like a cultivation where you've got multiple rooms? Did you leave somebody in there? That's only a safety thing to review over. Hey, Joey didn't sign out on this. Let's find out where he's at. Hey, we know he left. I saw it on video. That's only a safety thing to look forward to it. But targeted can come from anything that's in that regulatory book. Anything that we're seeing problems with is what we would pick targeted for. The other thing that we looked at as far as a targeted inspection or an unannounced inspection was metric accounts. So that was the seed to sale tracking system was a huge one. So make sure that your seed to sale tracking system is spot on, and everything else past that, audit list, all your stuff that you have for your business records, and you'll be ready for the audit.
And you know, your inspectors appreciate that, because I know a lot of them are overloaded in a lot of states. And the quicker you guys can get through that, and you know, the faster you can prove we're doing our job correctly, you kind of get put on the back burner a little bit, and you're like, all right, these people are doing the right thing. I don't have to worry about them for now.
That is correct. And let me mention another thing that's very important too is attitude. Everything is attitude driven too. I mean, if you come in and you're saying, hey, investigator, I'm looking for it, I'm just finding it out right now. Or instead of saying, why don't you go bother somebody else? Well, that's going to kind of change the motif of how the inspection goes. Have a positive attitude. Even if you can't find something, a lot of times investigators will say, okay, well, I know you're frustrated. Hours. Yeah. Hey, we're going to give you 72 hours here's a demand for business records to say, this is what we need to have, even though you're supposed to have it on site. We understand that people get nervous when regulators come in. Sometimes it's the manager's first week, and the full-time manager who knows where everything's at is off this week on vacation. We understand that happens. So take a step back, have a positive attitude for it, and work with the regulator and the investigator that's there, and you'll have a much more positive outcome too.
I always direct my clients and my employees, you have 3 answers for an auditor, for an inspector. Those 3 answers for your inspector are yes, no, I don't know, let me find that out for you.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. And I mean, if you don't know it, don't try to lie and make it up and like, here's, and I won't use names or a lot of the details, but we've had people that have actually fabricated some of the documents that they're supposed to have, instead of just saying, I don't have it right now, let me look for it and get it to you later, because they thought they had to present it right then and there, and there wouldn't be a problem.
Well, it's a nerve-wracking thing.
But that fraudulent document actually ultimately cost their license. Yeah. Because it was uttering that forged instrument was a lot more serious than not having the paperwork to begin with. So if you don't have it, say, I don't have it, I don't know, but I'll get it to you. Or what do I need to get, or what do I have to have for you to do this? Ask.
Yeah. Well, and that takes us back to the 3 keys of compliance that we've discussed in the past. Absolutely. Accuracy, consistency, and transparency.
Absolutely.
That's all anyone can really ask of us as owner operators.
Yep.
So tell us more about a general audit and how those work.
So a general audits, so if you have a specific investigation that you're doing on a licensee, say, for example, you were looking at their social media and they have these posts that indicate they're doing some nefarious or items that are not against, or they're against the rules. So you want to go focus on that particular licensee. And you could even do a Announced or unannounced. Sometimes an announced is okay because you're not telling them exactly what you're looking for, but cultivations and MIPS or product manufacturers might have different hours. And if you're traveling a long way, maybe you call them up and say, hey, I'd like to meet you at your facility at this time. Does that work for you? You're not telling them exactly what you're looking for. And then you go in there and you're doing this general audit. That general audit normally starts before we get to the licensed facility. It's going to be the background. It's going to be looking at, of course, the metric and all the social media posts, things before we get there. And then it starts as we get on location, before we even get to the front door or the back door for that matter, depending on what door we're actually going to. Any door that's used can be accessed for an inspection or an audit. And it starts from that standpoint. We're looking at cameras. We're looking at camera distances, angles. We're looking at signage. We're looking at door locks. We're looking at all the things that are in rules and regulations. And then once we step into the door, we look at the signage that's in there. We're looking at health and safety issue items. Is there mold and stuff that we can see or smell? It's not just what we can see. It's also all the other senses that we have. The other thing too is in Colorado, we actually carried gas detectors. We're looking for, sulfur. Sulfur dioxide was one of the things, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, oxygen levels, and then LEL, which is lower explosive limit, which are more for your MIPS using flammable solvents. So those are the things we're looking at too, because you have to have a closed loop system. If you're gassing that off, that's also a violation too. Number one, it's also a safety and safe and hazardous situation to be in. So we'd want to get everybody out of that. So we're looking at items like that also. But those general audits look through the whole thing. We'll go through the whole process, look at the actual cultivation itself. And depending on what we're doing, I've actually gotten down with a whole group of people. We've gone to an audit and actually wrote down every single metric tag in a multi-tier cultivation, and brought those tag numbers back and did an actual audit on every single tag number on there.
Ouch. I've had to do that many times as an operator, but as the inspector, ouch.
Well, the thing is they were reusing the tags, and they killed the tag out of the system, but they would put a tag back on a plant. So at first visual glance, it's got a metric tag on it. It's fine. But what we found is that they were using that to sell marijuana outside the back door.
I was going to say black market.
Exactly. But it looked like to the average auditor that when you came in, hey, they were tagged, everything's fine. So some of these investigations are very complex and in depth. And some of these, as you can imagine, that audit wasn't a 30-minute in and out. Thank you very much. It was actually, several hours with multiple investigators on scene. Yeah. So when I say an audit, it can be something as simple as, like I said, the targeted, hey, just stopped in the area real quick, just checking on your DVR, to like, hey, we're going to weigh everything in your facility, depending on what we're actually doing. And we've actually gone in there with scales and weighed all of the product that they've had in a facility. And you can imagine that can be time consuming. Even if we're doing like an administrative hold, we've got to weigh all that product. We're going to be thorough when we do that. So the thing is that we're there for a purpose. We're not trying. It's the key thing that what a lot of people don't understand is when we're doing these audits, our job is not to put you out of business, it's to keep you in business. Because if you're not in business, the regulator doesn't have a job. So if there's no businesses in the state, then the regulators don't have any jobs. So we're trying to keep you compliant. But if you're trying to do stuff out the back door or sell in the black market, that's where the criminal investigations really take hold.
Do administrative holds usually occur after an audit's performed? I would think that there's some, you guys either hear or receive product that's moldy or something, and then you have to go in and.
So an administrative hold, so what an administrative hold is that the product that is being placed on hold is subject to an investigation. That could be, i.e. the Department of Agriculture came in and they tested a lot and it's got a banned pesticide on it. So those items are put on hold because the investigation, it believes that there's a pesticide that was used that can't be. We're not saying that they are an illegal pesticide. It's just saying that they're on hold for that investigation. We're not going to destroy your product. So what the investigation hold does, it says, hey, you still have to maintain this. You can still grow it, cure it, and process it. You just can't sell it, transfer it, or have it be consumed. So that's what the administrative hold's for. So it can come after a Department of Ag inspection. It can come after an audit. It can come during a complaint of moldy product. And it could even be put on hold for a downstream hold because the product was found moldy at a cultivation, and then it was placed on hold there. And then that hold can actually go all the way down to the store that the product's actually at. So the administrative hold can be placed on it without you even knowing. You go in your metric account and there's a hold on it.
That's how you find out, is just go through your metric. You don't get a letter or anything?
No, because the downstream, all the downstream, you can't actually
Nobody else
notify.
is able to receive it. Yeah.
Yep.
And
So
how long can you expect an administrative hold to last? Like, how long does that whole process usually take?
that could take, I've had administrative holds last 2 years.
2 years. I mean, the product's not even, just throw it away by then. I mean,
sometimes, yes.
now, are they allowed to just destroy it? And not go through any of that? Can the operator
No.
just destroy the
So an administrative hold says you cannot destroy it. You have to maintain it. You can't just let it, like even for plants, for example, you just can't let your plants die. You have to maintain them. Now, can you enter into agreement to destroy them because it would be easier and not have the moldy product in your facility? Yes. Downstream holds, those products can be destroyed. For example, somebody had some bad product at a cultivation, maybe a pound of trim, and the product manufacturer mixed it in 10 pounds of trim and came out with all this oil that they made edibles out of and sent those edibles to 10 different stores. All of those stores, once it gets placed on administrative hold at that cultivation, it'll get placed downstream hold at the MIP and at the stores all the way downstream. So that's another reason why you need to keep your seed to sale tracking system up to date, because if you don't close out your harvests at your cultivation and they're open and it's subject to an administrative hold, even though it was a year old and downstream, it'll still be placed on administrative hold.
Got it. And we had a question come in from Mario Sanchez. Is there recourse for audit abuses by an inspector? And I'd like to touch on that at the end of our conversation when we talk about what happens when you're not prepared. I think that's a good time to pair that in.
Yep. And I'll cover a whole bunch of that. But do we want to jump into our checklist?
Yeah, so let's talk about being prepared for an audit. We're so excited. We've compiled what we think is going to be a great resource for our cannabis community. And we've come up with an audit checklist, and we are going to share with all of you a link where you can actually download this checklist for yourself and go ahead and use it at your will at any of your facilities. It will specify whether or not it's for cultivation or manufacturing or retail store specifically through here. And Tom's just going to walk us through this awesome audit checklist that we've created for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of the table of contents. It just kind of tells you what's kind of looking for it. So if we jump to the next page where we're really going to start on to what we're actually looking for in our audit checklist.
Next page, Lauren.
Okay, there we go. So this is kind of where it really starts. So mind you, this is a generic checklist. This is going to change not only for each state. Most of them will be very similar, but it also might change for your local jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions require certain extra things. And I'll use one jurisdiction where your licensees and permits are signs. So you want to have all your licenses there, your state license, your city license, or your local license. It might be a county license. You also need your tax licenses. All of these need to be displayed, and they need to be in a place that are visible to patrons, because people need to know that you have a tax number. And this is what we're going to talk about with Mario is not only do you have recourse against an auditor who has if you think they're abusing their power. But if you believe that a licensee is not paying proper taxes or other things like that, you also have recourse in that. And I'll explain that too down the road with where you can call and who you can and talk to about your recourses. But all your licenses, they got to be in view of the public so that they know that they're valid and up to date. One of the other things is like the state renewal letter. Some states, your license might expire, but they're going to give you a renewal notice that says, hey, we've received your application. Your old license is still good until we process your new application. That needs to be posted with your expired license so that people understand and know that those licenses are there. And I'll tell you, one of the other things that we look for, when I told you we start at the front door, when I walk in the door, I always looked for my licenses, and I always made sure that they were valid. And even though I was a state investigator, I also looked at the local licensing, because in Colorado, it's a dual licensing system. If you don't have a valid local license, then by law, you can't have a local state license. And that would be a point where that we could actually suspend your license at that point too. Next page, Lauren. So next page, we're looking at our signage. Now this is going to change in each of the different areas. And this is going to cover a couple different things, not just the state cannabis rules, but it's also going to cover a lot of your OSHA rules as far as like your eye wash stations, your emergency fire evacuation plan. One jurisdiction I know, what they had their licenses do is they had to have the license diagram posted at all points of ingress, egress to the licensed premise. And what that was for is if there was a fire inside the licensed facility, i.e. a cultivation that has multiple rooms, once they breached that door, the fire department had a map of where they could actually find anything, where they had to search. The other thing that they used it for too is if there was an open door at 3 o'clock in the morning and the police respond there, they can actually go inside the front door and have a map of the licensed facility, so that if they have an open door and they've got to do a search for a person within inside this facility or somebody that's actually trying to steal stuff from inside of it, they've got a map of knowing where they're going, and they can radio other officers for their safety procedures. So that also goes.
I encourage everyone to do 11 by 17 emergency exit route signs.
Yes.
So they're very visible in those situations with bright colors, bold lines, right? We're really talking about saving lives at this point, and these little tiny details
Absolutely
can really help that. And then also placing those emergency exit route signs at like if you're on your knee level and you're crawling, imagine yourself crawling through a hallway, putting those at that viewpoint also towards the ground. So that way, if there is a situation and people are crawling out of the facility, they can view those exit routes while crawling.
So one more thing to add on to Kady, what you said, use colors on your maps to indicate where the doors are. A lot of these cultivations were built in facilities that weren't designed as cultivations. So they're kind of hodgepodge together, and some of them you can get lost in rather quickly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might have people that know these places inside and out, but once you start putting smoke and other things in there, like Kady was saying, you're crawling on your hands and knees. The cultivation looks a lot different below grow tables than it does above grow tables. So use the colors. Where's the door located on these diagrams? The bright colors, it helps people, especially in a panic situation where they're like, okay, where's the door? The doors are all in red. Walls are in blue. So you've got different contracting colors, and it helps everybody. And like we said, that is a huge safety issue, and that does save lives. Okay, can we go to the next one? So this one's going to cover a lot of stuff on it. So your visitor's log, it's going to kind of go over not just the log itself, but verifying the ID of the visitor, the visitor badge required for it, what actually do you have to have in it. So these check marks are just to make sure that you're not only having your visitor's log, but the visitor log, the log out is the huge one. That last one where you have the log out required, huge, because I don't know how many times I've gone into place and it's like, oh, you must have 5 people hanging out back there. Where are they? They left.
It's Tuesday.
but why didn't they sign out? So you've got an inaccurate document that you're providing me. So that's where these stresses we were talking about before. Now all of a sudden, you're freaking out in this audit, and we don't need to. Just a simple little make sure that they're signing out. Like the camera footage. One thing I suggest too about cameras, and this is more so for your larger facilities, not so much a retail store that's only like 1 or 2 rooms. Even with that though, have somebody monitor the cameras and have somebody else walk around the facility. See where your blind spots are. A lot of people don't realize that, hey, I've got a great camera view of my safes until I open the door and the door comes in front of the camera. What is somebody doing behind that safe door? And that's where you might have employees stealing product or something like that, and you're not on camera. So make sure that you can see on camera where people are at. Have somebody go through the facility, walk through the cultivation, walk through the MIP, walk through the store. Where are your blind spots with cameras? What are your dailies? So this is all, make sure all your cameras are working. Like we said before, some cameras that were motion activated, they're great. But what happens when they start picking up a flickering light on the outside and it burns up all your DVR space? These are things that you need to check at. And that's what this checklist does, is look at it. When do you have, how far it goes back? How do you extract a file on it? All these things are what you need to check off. And like we talked about before, where each of the managers does it monthly or even quarterly, wherever it is that you feel comfortable with, that if somebody asks you to do this, this might be not just an audit, but it might turn out to be, hey, we just had a crime occur in your parking lot where a child was abducted by a parent. And, for whatever reason, can we see your video footage, and we need to get this information out? Well, if your managers can get that printed out, that's, we're talking about public safety. And that's what's ultimately important in this whole industry is safety. So make sure that all these are there, the IP address, your DVR systems are work. And then your alarms, do your alarm systems work? Do you have your alarm event log there? Do you have an emergency number, a non-emergency number to call to contact your local law enforcement? Because you might be in an area that you might be in the county, but close to a city. You call 911, it goes directly to the city dispatch and not the county dispatch, what you need. So make sure that you're aware of all these things. And that's what's on your alarm section.
And a lot of these logs you don't know you need until you know you need them. And we actually host dozens of logs and forms at buildmysop.com, like visitor logs and alarm event logs, things like that I learned personally from working with inspectors like yourself, Tom, over the years that were required. And they're all customizable for different states and different municipalities. So if there's certain fields you don't need or that you do need, you can use those.
And let me jump on this one too, the DVR access log. Some people found this, we found it where people were confused with this. So there's a DVR access list. Those are the people that are allowed to access the DVR. The DVR is going to be either in a locked area. It could be in a locked room. It can be in a locked cabinet itself. Anytime you open that cabinet, you have to access and put down on the DVR access log. This is specifically for the state of Colorado, but I know other states do it the same exact way. The person that's opening that box is the one that's accessing the DVR. The DVR might be owner John, and then the access reason would be Tom from ADT is changing out the hard drive. So ADT is not the person that's accessing the DVR. It's the owner, one of the people that are on that access list, not the person that's actually doing the work inside. There should be another section on why you're accessing it. And it should be John from ADT performing maintenance, whatever it is. But ADT is not the one that's accessing it. It's the person that has the key that's accessing it. So that's one of the things we found a lot of people had confusion with in the past. So next page. So this is going to jump into a little bit of your fire side and your emergency. Where's your first aid kits? Are they up to date? Some things in your first aid kit have expiration dates, just like your fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers need to be inspected at least once a year. You may have that with a outside company that comes in on a yearly contract. You may not. That might be something that is in your manager's duties to make sure that they're checking the fire extinguishers. Do you have them in the certain areas where they're easily accessible? Have you had proper training on them? Have your employees been trained on how to use them? I'll tell you one of the first and foremost things as far as fire extinguishers go, there's 3 different kinds, ABC, what they're used for. Do you have the proper fire extinguisher for the facility that you're in and for the potential fire or fire hazards that you have in your facility? So keep that in mind, that those change for what type of facilities and what type of fire hazards you have. That's a more of a fire department issue, but make sure that you have that. Once again, that goes back to that safety issue. And ultimately we're here for that, as the safety side. Same thing with the first aid. The emergency aid side of it is huge. You know, just when people have an emergency, they sometimes stop to think how easily things are. Back in the day, we used to say 911, and then they changed to 911 because people in emergency couldn't find the 11 on the phone. And some people think that that's funny, but that's true because you keep saying 1111. Well, it's hard to think 11 in that real, this emergent situation that is overwhelming. So that's why making sure that your exits are easily marked, all your areas are lit. Do you check your batteries on your emergency exit signs? That should also go into that monthly thing that you're doing in your SOPs, your checks. But hopefully you're doing all those, making sure you're checking all your boxes on your checklist, and going through all those to make sure that you're not having any fire hazards, that everything is in a safe spot, and that we're doing everything safe.
I've gone into so many manufacturing and cultivation facilities that use chemicals, and they don't have any spill kits. They're like, "What's a spill kit?" I'm like, "You need all of you need a spill kit."
So, and even a spill kit, some people have actually used kitty litter in the past. Well, part of it is how much kitty litter are you using, because kitty litter is clay. A lot of it is clay based, and clay's heavy. Are you going to put 100 pounds of kitty litter to where people can't lift the spill kit? So these are things that you also have to make sure that your employees are aware of and can actually perform the task.
Yeah, I do. I usually do a small bag of sand, a roll of paper towels. I do an extra pair of clothing, so a shirt and a pair of like sweatpants. I do a water bottle in there in case they need to douse themselves. Am I missing anything?
That's the big ones.
Yeah.
That's the big ones. Okay, next page. So we're going into more of the health side of it. Also in safety side is your safety data sheets. Not only are these important, but make sure that all your chemicals are labeled. Make sure that your flammable areas are labeled. But don't forget to have your safety data sheets in a spot that are close to the ingress egress. So if you do have that fire department entry and you do have that issue, that they've got their access to those data sheets there, because those are important. Also, you want to make sure that all your employees know where they're at, because we all look at them when we first get them, and there's a lot of information in there, and sometimes it gets boring. But I'll tell you, going back to that, do you dust it off or do you add water to it? These are very important things to know, and that's where all that information is contained, and that's why we have to have them there. And then going on to what we were talking about before about the food safety side of things, your health department stuff, looking at all of your items that you need for that. What are you doing with your cleaning, your waters, your general recycling? All of these are on your checklist. Some of the things on this checklist are going to be doubled because some things, like we said before, the fire department needs it, Department of Ag needs it. So we're going to put it in 2 different areas, like your emergency spill kit availability. That's also in your health department side because that is a health issue on that side of things. Can we go to the next page? So this one, as we're looking into our health and safety, we're also looking at your consumables and your expiration dates. A lot of your batches will have the same expiration date, and we put this in here as these are things that if you're selling expired product, it's the same as selling contaminated product. So make sure that we have a list of expiration dates. And this should be in your standard operating procedures of, hey, we're checking them on these days and we have the lists on it. A lot of people will put the expiration date in bigger letters on the back of the packaging that's at the point of sale so that they know, hey, these are coming up for expiration. Some places have a policy and procedure of, hey, when they get to this date, this is what we do with them.
Yep.
So
Every single day I go in and look at what's expiring within the next 2 weeks, and all of that gets somehow pushed out the door as a sale.
And if you want to put it on a sale, you want to have a fire sale on it, you want to sell it at a discount, that's a business practice that, I don't say what you can do with it or not. But
just don't sell it expired. That's it.
As long as they're not expired, and in Colorado, as long as you sell it,
Oh, next page.
Can't be given free.
Looks like we went back one. Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, records. Oh, wait, sorry. Go back one more, Lauren. There we go.
Yep. So facility records. So you have to, as far as Colorado goes, in most states, you have to maintain your business records to fully show transparency of your business. 6 months on site with 3 years that can be held off site plus the current year.
Depending on what state you're in, because I've seen everything between 3 and 7. 7's
yeah.
the highest.
And I just said with Colorado, but I said most states, you've got to maintain those records. They can be in digital and they can also be in paper format. So one thing about audits is nothing in audit says that the person on site has to actually have it in a book to hand to the auditor. The regulator can get them via email. They can actually send them to the manager that's on site. So as long as you have a digital access that they can get to and you can present it to the regulator that's asking for them, that's the same as having a paper side of it.
How long do you usually have to produce those records?
So in Colorado, you have to have 6 months on site. You have to actually hand it to the regulator at that point. A lot of times when they couldn't have it, like we talked about before, we would present them with a demand for records saying, hey, we understand you might not be the full-time manager. Here's a demand for records, 72 hours, get it to me. But you should have access to it. What I recommend, and I told a lot of people this, is a lot of these things don't change, but yearly or every 6 months, like a compliance binder where you have the lease, where you have your alarm contract, where you have your security company, all those items, your trash collection, all of those contracts, your power bills, all that stuff you place into one compliance binder that sits on the manager's desk. So when we ask for the business records, you've got a lot of them right there. You've got your lease, you've got that, which doesn't change, but every year or so, or every 2 years it could be. But once again, in your SOPs, your manager every 6 months is looking at those, changing out the documents on it. So make sure that you have all those in there. Your point of sale systems, those can be digital. I do know a lot of people, when they have those signed copies, they just keep adding them into that binder. And then you've got them right there.
Manifest you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Manifest, as you put them, they're signed manifests that you put in your binder.
Manifest, I used to do, because I don't know, I would coordinate over 70 deliveries a week. And I used to go make sure that at the beginning of my next week that I received all the manifests, all the hard signed copies, manifests from the couriers and anybody we had delivering. I'd verify that week was all done. I'd usually have to hunt down a few that I was maybe missing. And then at the end of that month, I'd go through my actual manifest list on Metric. I'd verify every single one and look at every single signature field and make sure they were all completed. And then I would file that for that month. And if an inspector walked in my door and said, I need the last 90 days of manifest, I just was able to go,
Proof.
Here you go.
Yep.
And I could produce those within like 30 seconds, which means you are on the back burner of your inspector's mind at that point.
Absolutely. Yep. And then the other thing too is you're looking at not only the records that you've got to carry for your business, you also have to carry your vendors' records. So where are your products coming from? And I'll tell you another one that has been targeted recently was testing for hemp products. So in Colorado, companies that are selling CBD products out of a marijuana licensed establishment, they can do that, but they have to have the testing records. So those vendor records that are testing from those hemp product manufacturers that you're getting those products from have to also be there. Yep. Mm-hmm. So that's what also needs to be there. Next one, Lauren. So not only do you have your business records, you have your employees' records. So I'll tell you, a lot of times we've actually asked for employees' training records. Where are those located and kept? Those are up-to-date records that you have to have. Do you have a copy of their ID? Do you have a copy of their occupational badge that they must have in certain areas?
Which in Colorado, you would require the occupational badge. New Mexico, they would require, and other states, just the background check.
Yeah, and some states actually require that the business owner makes the occupational badge, but they have to have that there, and it has to have all the pertinent information on it. So we're going to want to see that on all the employees, whether they're working or not on that day. So keep all those records in there. The other thing too is, for example, we've asked for, especially in an underage compliance investigation where somebody sold to a underage individual, we want to know the training records. What was this employee trained? And that should be kept in your employee records. They were trained on this day, and this is how they were trained by this person. These were the items that they showed. That's going to save the business a lot of heartache as far as the employee records go.
That the employee verifies that, yes, I do understand this process, and I agree. Not only do I understand it, but I agree to follow it.
And I'm going to toot our own horn at buildmysop.com that yeah, exactly. With our SOPs, you've got it right there that the employee has got it in their email. Here's the SOP on how to check IDs. You got it that day, and you messed it up and didn't follow the standard operating procedure. Well, that goes against you and is a mitigating factor for that licensee as far as the fines, as far as suspensions go. Hey, the licensee did a lot more, and the employee is the one that needs to take the fall for it. So the employee records are huge. Next one, Lauren. So these are going to be, this is just kind of like a generic checklist of, write some stuff down. Anything that's a document is better than no document at all. Of course, digital formatting is great, but anything that you can have is a print off and, even like a waste log at the back door that's handwritten. It's a document. It's a document that's required, and it doesn't matter if it's handwritten or if it's in digital format. So this is just a small little template that we can use and kind of.
I will say a lot of my inspectors preferred handwritten logs. They like wet ink logs. It's several of them.
I liked the ink logs a lot better because they were done right then and there. Whereas digital documents, we found so many discrepancies with them because the person that was usually doing the digital document is, i.e. a waste log. You had one person that was doing it, and they would do a handwritten log and turn it into somebody that was turning it in. And if they couldn't read their handwriting, a lot of times they just type in something. And, there's no way that many pounds of waste went out there. So they were, yeah. So you're right. I agree with you. The next slide, please, Lauren. So some of this we already covered, like the transfer manifest, current inventory report. That's going to change between what kind of seed to sale tracking system you're using or point of sale system. The other thing too is like the scales. Department of Ag, know your state's regulations on how you have to have your scale certified, and know how long it takes to get those done. Because if you don't have,
like one of our viewers, Bradley, said, I think in his state, it's called the Department of Weights and Measures. So different departments will also be, responsible to oversee those scales.
Right. But the question too is, how long does it take? Do they have a backlog? Does it take you 3 months to get an appointment to get your scales? If that's the case, make sure you get an appointment 3 months ahead of when your scales expire. Because if you're using an expired scale, that's like not using a scale at all. And that's
true. There are some companies and states, some scale and calibration companies that are certified through the state to go in and do a calibration.
Yes.
And they can put a sticker on temporary until the state gets there. It doesn't count as their annual one that the state needs to do, but it usually will suffice if you are in a pickle like that.
Yep. And once again, I'm talking from one state of where I've got most of the experience. So each state is a little bit different, but they're very similar. You've got to have those scales certified. Depending on what the name of the company is, it's Weights and Measures. Some places have a private. So it's just a little difference on it.
Yeah.
And then the next page, Lauren, which I think will be our last one. And it's just kind of like a generic scale to keep in your list of what's going on with it. your dates, how many scales you actually have, what type of scales, because sometimes depending on who's doing your weights and measures, they might want to do your scales that only go up to 5 pounds by this person, or scales that do pound increments, doing 100 pounds at a time where you're doing large waste.
Or you're doing, yeah.
Yeah, so it might be a different section that will do those weights and measures. Because I know, for example, like when you do truck scales, that takes a specialized scale certification where they've got a special semi-truck and certification that does it. So you got to know who to actually call to do your particular scales. So that's kind of a bit of our checklist. I know we're kind of come up on our hour, but I want to catch on.
I want to talk on, what happens if you're not prepared? And then also I wanted to address Mario's question about the recourse for an audit, like an actual inspector, if they abuse their auditing powers.
Yep. So if you're not prepared, we've kind of touched on this already. If you're not prepared, it causes so much undue stress on the person trying to find the items that you should have there easily. One little checkbox on this audit checklist will take away all of that anxiety. Number one. Number two is if I ask for an item and it's given to me, I'm looking these items over. I'm not spending more time looking around for other violations that could be potentially catastrophic for the business. If you're prepared for the audit, you've got the information there. I get what I ask for. I may have all these items that I'm not going to go through on site. I'm going to take back with me. For example, the lease. I may not look at the actual lease there. I might actually take the 30-page lease back with me to review. I may take the multi-page alarm contract back with me to review. But the more you get to me, the quicker you give it to it, the less stress that you have, the less time that I start looking around. It's a smoother, easier operation for everybody. It causes less violations. It causes less fines, and it causes less heartache all the way around. The best way to prepare for an audit is to prepare for an audit, to make sure that you go through the checklist, to make sure that you have standard operating procedures, to make sure that you're training your employees, to make sure your employees know what they need to do to operate the DVR, to operate the point of sale, and to say, I don't know, I don't have that answer, investigator, I will get it to you. When do you need it by? Try to have a positive attitude.
All of this is going to be done through the eyes of that specific inspector.
Correct.
One inspector might say something and another inspector might say something else, or one might care really about this and another inspector might really care about this. And so it is, you got to know, it's up to that interpretation of that specific
And
person.
let me jump onto Mario's question here, because you might have an investigator, you might have investigators overlap things too, where you've had you had an audit and then a week later you have a different investigator that comes in and is doing the same exact audit. They may not know, number one, that the other investigator was there, number one. Number two, if you do it just as smooth and just so you know, I just had this inspection by Investigator Mohan, last week. And if they say, okay, well, I'm still doing it, that's fine. Go through with what the investigator has. Don't argue it at that point. Don't try to argue with anyone that's conducting your audit on site. That's not the place to do an argument. So you have a lot of recourses. If it's a state or even local auditor, whether it's the fire department, local licensing authority, you can always ask for that person's immediate supervisor. That is your first recourse. If that doesn't work, you can always go to the director of that particular division. That's ultimately would be like the director for the Marijuana Enforcement Division. You can actually do what's called a IRF and do a complaint on an investigator online, and you can even do it anonymously. You can use a phone call and call into a hotline. And these are all for the state of Colorado, but most states have these in place. Ultimately, you can go to the Attorney General's office and say, hey, the Marijuana Enforcement Division is being unfair by sending multiple auditors asking for the same thing. So if you've got an abuse by an auditor, Mario, you can go to all of these different ones. I would start out with the immediate supervisor. That's usually where you get the fastest response. But if you don't get that, ultimately you can go all the way up to the Attorney General's office for the state. You can go to the mayor of the city. Ultimately, you'd want to stop with the city manager and try and go with the lower levels first, because that's where you're ultimately going to get a lot of your cooperation. Because my bosses didn't want to hear complaints against me. I didn't want to hear complaints against my investigators. So ultimately, we want to all be in compliance together. So this is to work together with it. But not just for department like the Marijuana Enforcement Division, but you also have the Department of Agriculture or Weights and Measures. Each one of those have their own supervisors. They have their own director of that division, including the health department, whether that be local or state. You ultimately have all of these resources to find out if you have somebody that's abusing their authority.
Now, am I allowed as an operator, when an auditor comes into my facility, to record that audit?
Absolutely. So most of the time they're recorded anyway. The video surveillance that you have, some places that have actually done audits at actually have audio on their video. That's okay.
I
And even
think
if you,
it's a good training tool for future managers too. This is what it actually looks like going through an audit of our facility with an inspector.
so the only thing that you can't do is you can't interfere with the audit itself. So if you try to do your video or audio to the point that it's becoming a safety hazard, to where you're putting your video into the area that the investigator can, with a bright light, and the auditor can't see where they're walking through because they're in a, for example, a dark room, and they want to use a green light, and you're trying to cause a safety issue. That's when it's not appropriate to try and film or video. If you want to do it from 5 feet away, totally fine. And honestly, I know for a fact that every time that I went and did any interaction with anybody, I believed I was on video and audio, and that's how I conducted myself. If I weren't on audio or video, it would be a surprise to me, because every place that I went to is supposed to have at least video.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So just to kind of summarize as we come to an end here, what happens if you're not prepared? You can expect either just, a warning, right?
You can get, if
Verbal
it's
or
something
written.
minor, verbal warning, written warning, then you can get
Then you go
assurance
into
of voluntary compliance, which says, "Hey, I made this mistake." These are all signed documents that go in your file, your licensing file. You can do what's called an order to show cause, where you could have a hearing, where you could get fines, revocation of your license,
or personal occupational license
yes,
ramifications.
suspension days of your occupational license, of your business license, and these are all. And mind you, if you have some action on your state license, that can also cause action on your local license. And some local jurisdictions will also issue fines or revocation days, and both of those kind of work in conjunction. So even though you get a double hit, there's two separate licenses. That violation can actually go to both licenses.
Okay. One of my biggest fears always as an operator, because I can't control everybody and I'm usually stuck in my warehouse all day. Have you ever gone into a parking lot where employees are consuming on site in a facility's parking lot?
Yes. Actually, so I've done a few different investigations where they've consumed in the parking lot, but they've also parked their car just off of the parking lot of the licensed facility. So they didn't think it was on the licensed premise, but they're still, they're not consuming on the licensed premise itself, but they're still coming into the facility under the influence.
Right.
Yep. And if they're actually in their vehicle and they have their keys with them, it could actually be a DUI or DUID, because they're actually in physical possession and control of their vehicle, even though the keys are not in the ignition. If they have them in their possession and they consume in their vehicle, they could actually get a DUI.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So,
well, this has been a great conversation. I hope our viewers have gotten a lot of insight, and are able to feel more prepared after listening to this hour with us, as well as receiving our free audit checklist. We are going to have available for you the link on all of the different channels associated with this video, where you can go in and just download your free audit checklist. and give us a call if you have any questions. We'd be happy to review that with you. And you can visit us at buildmysop.com for any more information on how to contact us. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. Everybody have a great night.
Eli Goodman, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Best Days. We're here in New Mexico. We have many buildings that are under lease and in development and many that are actually currently operational. So from a production perspective, we have a warehouse grow facility, we have outdoor farms, we have a processing center in which those outdoor farms need to go. We have manufacturing site, in which place we make all of our secondary products, all of our edibles, we got to package everything. And then from a retail perspective, we have 3 open retail stores, and we're about to expand 5 more as we head into adult use, which we're very excited about. Build My SOP has been extremely helpful for us and makes everything much smoother. Cannabis is a very interesting world to operate in because its regulatory changes are ongoing. We go from a regulator to a new regulator and a new set of rules. Going from medical, going into adult use, things keep changing and developing. And there's a lot of information to pass on to all of our staff, which are working in different sites with different needs and different specific operating procedures. Build My SOP gives us this very easy platform that is accessible to those employees, both to go back and see an SOP, to look at it, to make sure they're following protocol as originally asked. We can use it in training, and they also are signing off. So they have stated that we have asked them to do it in a certain way, and they're able to do it, and that makes it a lot easier for me at the end of the day, just to know that we are doing everything we can do to stay as forward with compliance as we can possibly imagine.